Hello Exile, and I'm happy to present the final full guide for my Exsanguinate Ascendant character. In addition to the path of building and general tips for this character, this guide has a specific focus on pushing the build past the T13-ish barrier people seem to hit with this skill, into something that can function effectively and truly into the endgame. Once this video is over, I hope you'll have a good idea of whether or not this playstyle is for you, or if you are already playing Exsanguinate, hopefully you'll learn some tips to really get the most out of the skill. Exsanguinate is an auto-targeting physical spell that has both a hit and a physical damage over time portion. Despite being blood-themed, this is not a bleed, and it does not scale with bleed damage. At base, it can hit a finite number of targets in a small cone in front of you, but it's able to be chained, giving it a sort of arc feel. While it can be scaled as either hit or damage over time, we'll be going for a dot playstyle. Defensively, we build the character as a hybrid corrupted soul character, scaling both life and energy shield, utilizing Petrified Blood to maintain a low life status, and glancing blows for block consistency and additional damage reduction. As far as build pros and cons go, this build has great early game and strong early mapping with an active and dynamic playstyle, good area control, good clear, and great defensive layers. As for the cons, cluster jewels are absolutely mandatory for late game mapping and bossing. It does require uniques, so it can be difficult to put together in solo self-found, and those uniques can be expensive depending on where we're at in the league. Damage is also very hard to scale past a certain point. Currently my POB is sitting at 7.6 million, and it would take quite a bit more investment to get that up to 10 if I really wanted to, and I don't really think that's worth it. So there is a hard cap on damage. As for build difficulty, I would say this build is moderately difficult to make and play, requiring a good understanding of itemization and managing multiple life pools simultaneously. So if you're new to the game, proceed with caution. Now, if you've been following along over the last couple weeks as this character's progressed on my channel, you'll note that the path of, our final tree, our final character tree, hasn't changed all that much from the original one that I posted before the league started. All in all, the tree is great. It's handled the game really well. I'm very happy with it. What has changed about the POB is the amount of detail that I've put into it. I put a lot more work into fleshing out the various leveling trees that are included with it. There's now 9 separate trees for various levels of character progression. There's also going to be skill setups for each relevant level of character progression underneath the skills tab. You can see here that they're all organized nicely into various level groupings, with each one showing the support gems you want to have for each skill at various points during the game. A lot of work went into this. And then, of course, under items, all of the recommended uniques, all of the required uniques, all of our current endgame items, all of our recommended leveling items that we basically used, they're all going to be there under the various gear sets. There's both a leveling gear set and an in-game gear set, and the in-game one is the one that I'm currently using. I tried to make this path of building as comprehensive as possible, to the point that where you could just download this, close out the video, start the character, and hopefully have a successful league, or a successful character. So let me know if I missed anything in the path of building. I will add it, I will update it, and yeah, let's just make this like the best POB I've ever made. Now let's talk about some of the clever mechanics that this build utilizes, and the first one is Petrified Blood. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how Petrified Blood functions, but the TLDR is that it limits our life pool to half and mitigates a portion of the hit damage dealt to us via bleed mechanic. There's a great video series that breaks down the complex functions and interactions of the skill that I'll leave a link to in the description if you really want to learn the ins and outs of Petrified Blood. The next mechanic that's core to this build is the Corrupting Blood and Void Sphere combination, and this is honestly my favorite part. One of Exsanguinate's main downsides is its long cast time, making Corrupting Blood application sort of inefficient. But by using Void Sphere as an application engine, we can automate the process of applying Corrupting Blood to basically everything. Void Sphere itself is a powerful area control spell, and with the build's focus on duration, it lasts longer than its cooldown takes to recharge. We also use Phantasmal alternate quality for increased pulse frequency. Due to the current league mechanics stationary playstyle, I just throw it in the center of every ultimatum, and it mops up most of the mobs without any real fight. For in-game bosses like Maven or Awakener, however, we swap to Stormbrand, as constantly repositioning the orb through various boss teleports can get frustrating. Now, the next interesting mechanic we utilize in this build is the Blessing support gem. Now, this is available on the March to the Legion boots and only here, and with the changes to reservation costs in 3.14, we no longer need to have the mana on hand required to reserve auras. And there are lots of auras we really want in this build, and with March of the Legion granting us a blessing, we transform all of those into temporary buffs that we can use, kinda like Warcries. And this is what I meant earlier about having an active and dynamic playstyle. March of the Legion basically doubles our damage, but at the cost of the micro required to maintain aura uptime. Luckily, most of the bosses is actually relevant against have long, boring phases that let us reactivate our auras. And again, since we have a ton of duration, they last quite a while. For mapping, I only use Haste and Malevolence to cut down on the brain power required to keep up the auras, but for bosses, I also use Pride and Zealotry. Now let's talk about how to gear the character. While leveling, focus on life and resist for all non-unique slots. You can swap to low life pretty early. I swapped around level 38, and once you do swap to low life, go ahead and pick up yourself a couple Red Beaks or a Red Beak and Springleaf. Now Red Beak grants a large amount of global damage while on low life, and this will basically carry the character for a long time. I was able to easily obtain a couple Red Beaks on day 1, and they carried me all the way to T11 maps before I was forced to upgrade to something that actually did some more damage. They're just insane, so do yourself a favor. Once you're low life, use Red Beaks. And you can even upgrade to Dread Beak for the Constant Onslaught if you want. Another good unique that's really good for the build is Lori's Lantern. I honestly only replaced this in my build because I crafted a Curse on Hit ring. Up until that point, this is a great ring to just have. It grants you move speed, chaos resistance on low life, and the damage that hits you is unlucky, which is just an additional layer of defense that's really nice to have. And it also grants all res, which makes gearing your character a lot easier. Now, when it comes to in-game itemization, there are a few uniques that are core to this variation of the build. Ivory Tower is one of those. Now, this unique chest armor converts our reserved life into flat energy shield, and it also causes chaos damage to be taken from our mana before our life, letting us shrug off otherwise life-threatening chaos damage with an enduring mana flask. The next required unique is the Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel with the Doriani tag, and that'll grant us Corrupted Soul. This is going to give us a large amount of flat ES based on our maximum health, and it lets 50% of damage bypass our ES. Combined with Ivory Tower, this gives us a huge hybrid life pool that, when combined with our recovery, block, and leech mechanics, make us decently tanky. March of the Legion, we already talked about March of the Legion. All res, blessing, support, these are just great boots. They also have 30 move speed if you can get well enough rolled ones. Now, once you are up to about T11, T12 maps, you should look to upgrade from Red Beaks into Cold Iron points. Now, these can be quite expensive on league start, but they drop in price significantly over the course of the league, and they are an incredible power spike for your build. They can easily serve as your in-game weapon if you don't wish to craft or buy something else that's substantially more expensive. Now, depending on how much damage you want to do, you can either dual wield these, or you can go 1 Cold Iron plus 1 crafted rare shield for more defense. The next unique build that's not per se required, but it's very good and I don't plan on replacing it, is the Doriani's Invitation Physical Variant Belt. Now, this belt gives us a bunch of resist and also grants us some physical damage leashed as life, which is good for recovery, great for sustain, and if you do pick up a little bit of reduced mana reservation somewhere, this becomes a very potent defensive layer in the form of Overleech, since we'll be able to leech up past our maximum life, because Petrified Blood will keep us at 50%. Now, optionally, you can also use a Rumi's Concoction until your block is naturally capped, but once it is, drop it for a more utility-focused flask, such as a Basalt Flask. Now let's talk about the rares that you want to get on this character. Key offensive stats include plus level gems, that includes plus level all spell skill gems, plus level all physical spell skill gems, and plus level all strength skill gems. This can be found on wands, the Cold Iron Point Dagger, and amulets. The next stats you want to look for are physical damage over time multiplier, generic damage over time multiplier, percent increased damage over time, spell damage, global physical damage. These are all just good stats in general for scaling your damage, and you want a good balance of damage over time multiplier and additive damage from stuff like spell damage and global physical damage, and that'll scale your damage really effectively into endgame. Some secondary stats that also scale our damage through other means are skill effect, duration, cast speed, and then minimum frenzy charges if you can craft those on your jewelry if you have open suffixes. Now, as far as key defensive stats, we're looking for life, elemental resistances, of course, chaos resistance is very helpful, global percent increased energy shield. This is really only available on amulets and Crusader rings, but since we have such a large flat pool of energy shield from Ivory Tower and Corrupted Soul, this is a very effective stat on us. Attack block and spell block are very good, and life gain on block from a Shaper shield is also incredibly strong on our build. Physical damage leeches life, such as on the Doriani's belt or on a rare Delver ring, very good. And then of course the last stat being mana regeneration to kind of shrug off a little bit more chaos damage. Now, optional mods for your rares include things like a vulnerability on hit ring, which means if you have one of these, you can drop the curse on hit setup on your Void Sphere in favor of a Culling Strike, and that's just a little bit better quality of life and better boss damage. And also something like the nearby enemies take increased physical damage Elder mod on helms, which is a significant buff to your damage, but also can be expensive to craft a usable version of the helmet with something like life and resistances. Now, for cluster jewels, we use spell damage larges into fizz dot mediums with no smalls. Conjured Wall is the only required notable on our larges, and any other 2 notables will work. Just make sure you have the spell block. On our medium cluster jewels, we use the Blood Artist plus the Phlebotomist notables. These are the 2 maximum damage fizz dot notables you can get. You could argue that we don't crit enough to make this efficient over something like Rend, referring to the Phlebotomist notable, and most of the time you are right, but during mapping this extra damage doesn't really matter anyway, and for bosses that do matter, we use Stormbrand as a crit engine instead of Void Sphere, and that will basically give us 100% uptime. For rare jewels, life and physical damage multiplier are the key stats, with the 3rd and 4th slots being flexible. I've included a configured Pathofexile Trading Search that will bring up all of the relevant available options currently available on trade for you to search through. That way you don't have to make a jewel search. You can just use the one in the POB notes. Now let's talk about skill links. I'm just going to show all of the POB skill links on screen. Awakened gems are not required here, but are exceptionally helpful in maximizing your damage. We map with Chain in our main links, and we swap to Swift Affliction basically only for Cyrus and Maven, and sometimes hidden passive stuff like the Formed, the Twisted, the Feared, and sometimes the 10 bosses ones, just depending on how lazy I am. Just for some miscellaneous character notes, kill all the bandits. Kill them all. As for lab, take your Gladiator notable first, and then go Path of the Witch. Path of the Witch will let the Scion start a second passive tree from the Witch's starting location. While we're leveling, we're going to path up to Pain Attunement naturally, and then once we have our Uber Lab, we'll disconnect the passive tree for better point efficiency as we start to swap into our cluster jewels. And like the previous POB, I included leveling notes in the actual path of building, so I'll only go over like the first 4 acts of the character here with you. But if you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them either here or on my Discord. Just let me know. And yeah, that's going to wrap up this character for me. I had a blast playing it. It was really, really fun. The damage could have been higher, but you know, I'm not complaining. I feel like it did great. I'm probably going to spend the next week or so farming currency, and then once I have quite a bit saved up, we'll start our next couple projects. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.